Will be given by Elvira Albert and Nikki from
So in this talk, we are going to present two subjects that are in principle are not related. One is test case generation, and the other is cost analysis. And at the end, we will see some links between the two topics. And the reason why we talk about these two issues is because currently our research unites in the group. And first, let me present you who is the group of people working on these topics. So we are a number of lecturers, associate professors here in Complutense. This is Nikki and I, who will speak today. Rudy is Susan Smith, who is there, and we have also two people in Politecnica, Germán and Damiano. And there are 5 PhD students currently in the group, and they are also here in the room, that are working in this subject. So all the things I'm going to present is a joint work of this group. They can be considered authors of these slides as well. Okay, so we have 2 parts in this class. In the first one, we are going to see resource usage analysis. We will start with a short introduction to the topic, and then we will see the 2 main phases in cost analysis. First, the generation of cost relations from programs. The second one, obtaining closed form upper and lower bounds from these cost relations. We will talk a bit, only a little bit, about the treatment of fields, because it's one of the challenges in static analysis of object-oriented languages. And finally, we will conclude future works and main publications in the topic. And then the second part, Nikki will talk about the other topic, which is test case generation. He will start with an introduction to the topic. We will present our approach to test case generation, which is based on constraint logic programming. And he will talk about compositionality of the technique, abstraction guided test case generation, and finally we'll conclude with discussing resource-driven test case generation, which is somehow the point that unifies or merges the 2 techniques that we will see. And there will be some demo at the end, if we have time. So let's start with the first part, resource usage analysis. So what is the goal of resource analysis? Our objective is to be able to bound the cost of executing a program, say P, on any input data. It receives an input data X, and we want to obtain a bound which is valid for any possible instantiation of the data of the input data X. And we want to do this statically, which means that I don't want to run the program. It's clear that reasoning about cost is, even for small programs, is not too difficult, it's error prone, and ideally cost analysis should be automatic. Other names for cost analysis are resource analysis, and we'll use both of them. And also when we talk about cost analysis for infinitely large input data, it's called complexity analysis. So we're going to work on a framework of cost analysis which is parametric on the notion of resource, and it works with any resource which is cumulative, which is always increasing along the execution. Like, for example, the number of executed instructions. Those can be source-level instructions or bytecode instructions. And we can also instantiate it with memory usage. If we ignore the garbage collector, everything works directly. If there are some extensions also to handle garbage collection during static analysis, but I will not talk about this today. Another possible resource is the number of calls to a specific method. So this can be interesting. For example, if we have a method that produces a readable event, like sending an SMS. There are other instances like calling remotely some server, which is also an interesting resource model. And all those are currently available in the system. And finally, termination, which is considered for us is the simplest resource, which only guarantees that there exists an upper bound, but it doesn't compute it. It doesn't give which one it is. Okay, when talking about cost analysis, there are different kinds of costs that one can do. The ones that we do in the system are these two in red. We do upper bounds on the worst case cost. And this is clearly very useful because we compute in this way resource guarantees, which means that it is guaranteed that the execution of the program, any execution of the program, cannot exceed the upper bound that we infer. We can also do lower bounds on the best case cost, and those can be useful, for example, in the context of distributed and parallel programming, because before parallelizing a task, we want to be sure that it consumes enough resources. Otherwise, the cost of parallelizing can be larger than actually executing the task locally. And there are other kinds of cost analysis that could be done that we do not do, like average cost. This would require some probabilistic study. Also, when doing cost analysis, there are two classes of bounds. One can be non-asymptotic bounds, which means that I want to be very precise as possible, give concrete constants and formulas as precise as possible. This is also called microanalysis. And one can also do asymptotic cost analysis, in which I am only interested in the behavior for infinitely large input data. And that's called also macroanalysis or complexity analysis. We do both things in the course. Again, there's a distinction. If the results of the analysis are platform independent, this is what we do, platform independent analysis. Like, for example, number of instructions is a resource which is independent on when it's going to be executed, or the memory allocated as well is platform independent. There are other types of resources which are platform dependent, like, for example, time, those things execution time, or energy. Those are platform dependent cost measures that we don't do directly, but the information that we compute can be also useful if you want to estimate these kind of things. Okay, so let's review the state of the art in automatic cost analysis. The first works date back to 1975 with the work by Wainwright. And he already had a system which was quite interesting, it's called metric, and it could compute automatically upper bounds for some restricted class of strict functional programs. It was a long time ago. Also, in the first work by the Coussot on abstract interpretation, they already mentioned that performance analysis is an application of static analysis in abstract interpretation. And since then, we can say that there are a big number of analyses and systems have been built trying to extend the capabilities of cost analysis in one way or another. We can see that initially most of the work was done in the context of declarative languages, with functional programming, trying to estimate the different evaluation strategy costs in the presence of different evaluation strategies, higher order functions. It is also continued currently by Hoffman and his group. In logic programs also there has been activity since then. And in the context of imperative programs, there is some early work in the 70s, and then the topic was not much studied, and we revived it somehow in 2007 with our first work on cost analysis of Java programs. And also currently in the group of Sumit Gurwani, there is a lot of activity going on. So there are different ways of doing cost analysis. The one we're going to see today is based on the classical approach, which is the one proposed by Wainwright in 1975, in which cost analysis has two main phases. In the first one, we start from a program and we do some analysis to generate recurrence relations. So these recurrence relations are the ones we study when we are doing our degrees. They express the cost of executing a part of the program in terms of other fragments of the program, so they are in recursive form. This is the first phase. And in the second phase, we solve these relations in order to obtain closed forms or formulas which are not in recursive form. I mean, they are directly they can be directly evaluated. So let us see, we will see now these two phases in big detail, so I will extend these explanations. So the situation is that most work has focused on the first part, I mean the work we have seen in functional logic programming and imperative programming, was focused on generating recurrence relations from the different kinds of programs. The difficulties of the second phase have been mostly overseen. It was believed that we had recurrence equations that could be solved by mathematical tools. And we realized in Costa that having a cost analysis, a real cost analysis, requires work on both phases. And we will discuss this and we will see why. So let's start to see how these two phases work and how we do the cost analysis in our case using our system. And we're going to work on this small example all the time. It's a method which sorts the elements of an array of integers. And as usual, we have two nested loops. In the first loop, we traverse the array from the last position until the first one. And at each iteration, we put the ith element, equals 1, that we are seeing. We put it in the correct position, keeping always the last part of the array ordered. So this is what the inner loop we do. We go from the last part of the array and we place the element in the position in such a way that the last positions of the array are always ordered. So this is our running example. We are not going to count instructions with numbers, with constants. We are going to consider these two symbolic constants. Q refers to the number of instructions that are executed in the for loop. I mean, I don't want to count 2 or 3 or 4, because depending if we want to count bytecode or source code, this constant could be a number of another. So Q are the instructions in the for loop, excluding those which are in the while loop, and P are the instructions, the number of instructions that are executed in the while loop. So A, remember, is the array, which is the one that I want to order. What is the complexity, or what is the resource consumption of this loop? What do we expect to get? So this is what Costa is going to give us. What does it mean? The cost of sorting an array of length A. So here now, in the cost analysis, when we talk about A, we mean the array, the length of the array A. So we can see that the outer loop, the for loop, is executed a linear number of times. We traverse the whole array. A is the length of the array. We traverse it A minus I times. So the instructions that I have here in this loop, Q instructions, will be executed A minus 1 times. Alright? And at each iteration of the for loop, I execute the while loop. So how many times I execute the instructions that I have within the while loop, the P instructions? In the worst case, I execute it a quadratic number of times. Because for each iteration of the for loop, I can go in the worst case, I can traverse again the whole array here. Okay? So this is what we expect, or what Costa is going to give us, and we can see that, now we should see that this is going to be the worst case complexity. Alright? So what is the best case? Because we can also do a best case analysis. In the best case, the array is ordered, and I am not going to execute the while loop. The array is ordered. Every time I am going to put an element, I exit the loop because it's already in the correct position, and this would be a best case lower bound. Okay? So let us see how to automatically, now what I'm going to explain in more detail is how do we go from the program to these formulas, which are the upper and the lower bounds that we're going to generate. Okay, so these are, as I was saying before, the two main phases of the analysis. In the first one, I start from the program. I do some static analysis to produce closed relations, and then from the closed relations, I solve them in the formulas we have seen, best and worst case. So the perm is the one that we were seeing. Again, it is the sorting algorithm. And after this static analysis, which by now is a black box, the tool generates automatically something like this. So we can see from the shape that they look like recurrence equations. So they look like mathematical equations in which I have some constants. These are constants, really, the Q and the Q could be numbers. I accumulate things I call I relations in the cost equation system, but they are not really recurrence equations because I have constraints here to the right. So I have these constraints which are attached to the equations that we will see now what they mean. So this is the first step from the perm to the cost relations. So let me show you how we can do this automatically. How do we do it? For each of the methods, we look at the loops that we have inside the methods. So for example, in this sorting algorithm, first we try to express, to compute what is the cost of executing this while loop. The while loop, for each of the loops, we define a corresponding cost relation, in this case it's C, that expresses the cost of executing the loop. So, what is the cost of executing the while loop? We are counting instructions, we said. And we said, every time I execute the while loop, I perform P instructions. So what I do is I accumulate in a corresponding cost relation P, the number P, which are the total number of instructions that I execute at each iteration of the while loop. But I need more things in order to have equations that I can solve later. The next thing I have are these constraints, and I want to achieve these constraints that I have to the right, which tell me how the sizes of the variables change when I traverse this while loop. So for example, I have this instruction which increases j by 1, and I produce a corresponding constraint in the equation that tells me that variable j in the recursive call at each iteration of the while loop is increased by 1, increases the value of j, the corresponding j by 1. And this is done by a size analysis which inspects the instructions that I have in the piece of code that I am analyzing. So I have here this j++, which is transferred to this one, and besides, the guard in the while loop tells me the applicability conditions of the equations. So I have two conditions in this while loop. One is that j is smaller than the length of the array, and the second one that the jth element of the array is smaller than value. And this is transformed automatically in these guards that are giving me when I can apply each of the equations. So here there is an interesting phenomenon that happens. We have one case, which is the first one, in which the first guard does not hold. So j is smaller or equal than the length of the array, and I exit, and I don't execute any instruction of the while, so I have cost 0, a best case 0. In the second case, I want to have a guard in which this condition holds and this one does not hold. So j is smaller than the length of the array, but the jth element is smaller than value. What happens here? It's happening that, as I said before, arrays in the cost equations, in the cost analysis, are abstracted to the length of the array. So I cannot observe anymore in the static analysis a particular element inside the array. I cannot talk about the jth element that I have in the array. So I have to lose this information. I lose this in the abstraction. I cannot put it here. So also think that the equations we produce are mathematical equations that they work on integer variables. I cannot use arrays here because I have to solve the equations afterwards. So there is here a loss of information that is due to the fact that we are doing static analysis to approximate what the cost of the perm is. Okay, so we lost this guard, but it's not a problem, as we will see. And the second one, I have the condition, I have the applicability condition. Assume that both bars are satisfied, and then I execute the while loop, and I accumulate at each iteration giving instructions. Okay, so these are the equations for the while, and we proceed like this with the whole program. We go loop after loop, method after method. So for example, if we look at the outermost loop that we have here, in the same program, the for loop, we will have also recursive equations that express the cost of executing this for loop. In this case, we accumulate q instructions, we said, at each iteration. So we have here the value q. But now there is also something interesting, that is that we have an inner loop. But this inner loop is already defined by means of equations. The cost of executing this inner loop is defined by corresponding equations. So what we accumulate here is the cost of executing this while loop. We just add the cost. And as before, we have to produce the constraints here, which tell me how the sizes of variables change along the execution. And this is done by means of a size analysis, which looks at the instructions. We have here that j is equal to I plus 1. We have here this I minus 1, which is translated into this constraint here. The value of variable I is increased. And as before, the guards that I have in the loops become the applicability conditions for the different equations. I have one condition in which I don't enter the loop because I is smaller than 0, and I don't execute any instructions, 0. And I have one condition in which I enter the loop, I accumulate all the instructions at each iteration. So the process is fully automatic, and it can be performed for any sequential Java program. And finally, we have an equation that links the cost of sort. We have the cost of sort in terms of the length of the array, which is the cost of executing this loop. We introduce a call to the cost of executing the loop. And very important to analyze all the instructions in the size analysis and produce the constraints. I is the length of the array minus 2, and also I have here that A is an array, so I know before starting the analysis that it cannot have a negative length. It can be greater or equal to 0. Okay, so this is the first part. I'm not going to go into the details of the underlying analysis, so that you can, any size analysis can be used here. I mean, this, the approach allows having more precise, less precise size analysis, more efficient. It's like a parameter or a component in our analysis which can be improved independently. And then the approach, as we said, goes loop by loop and generates the equations. Okay, so this is the first part, but we are not happy with this. I mean, these equations are not very useful in practice. We have to evaluate them for any input, and they are in recursive form. Sometimes, because of the abstractions, we will see that produce non-deterministic results. And we want to get something like this. What we saw before, it was a formula, a closed formula, which tells me the cost of sorting the array is exactly this expression. And now I want to solve not only sort, but all the auxiliary relations that we have produced as well to compute the cost of sort. So we want to get things like this, and we want to get best case of this form, as we saw before. And this is what the second phase of cost analysis does. Now we have this set of equations, that these equations know that they work always now on integer variables. We don't have data structures anymore. If we have an array in the program, now we'll talk about the length of the array. If we have we haven't introduced an example with list, but if we have a list, for example, the corresponding variable would be the length of the list. If we have a tree, we'll talk about the depth of the tree. So we map data structures to variables, to integer variables that refers to their sizes. Okay? So this, what we have here, this is a constraint logic program, more or less. So let's reason about this. The first thing, when we face a problem, we generated cost relations of this form. We said, okay, now we have already mathematical cost relations. Let us use computer algebra systems like Maple, Maxima, there are many systems that solve recurrence equations. But what these systems can do, why not use directly them? We tried hard to use them. But what these systems can do, what they solve, what they handle, are recurrence equations which have this form. I mean, they require deterministic recurrence relations. They require that we have only one base case and only one recursive case, and usually only one argument, and ideally a decreasing argument. So they can handle equations of this form, and if you give them one equation of this form, they give you a very precise result, much more precise than anything that we can do. But the problem is that in practice, when you do cost analysis of programs, you never find anything like this, not even for very simple programs. Why? In the first case, cost relations are non-deterministic. Why they are non-deterministic? Because we lose information in the first phase of cost analysis. I'll show you a very simple example in which we lost a guard because we are not observing in the mathematical equations. We cannot observe a particular value in an array. So we lost information, and then we introduce here non-determinism. So we have these two equations which, in principle, overlap the applicability conditions, and I can choose them randomly. So, for example, if you ask me now, what is the cost of executing this while with an array of length 10, A is the length of the array, and if looking at the first J is 1, which was a position in the array. So all these possible runs are solutions. I mean, I can go and I can apply. If I want, I apply once the third equation and then the second one, and I finish with this. I can decide to apply twice the second equation and then the third one. I finish, and so on. So I have many solutions here. So they are not deterministic. What else happens? It happens that I usually have many arguments because the cost of programs usually depends on many variables. And all these variables have to be here in the equations, defining what is the cost. So no way it's going to depend on one variable, as cost equations, as recurrence equations expect. So in this case, I have a counter I that increases until reaching A. So the two variables have to be there. And besides being non-deterministic, I have multiple equations. Even if they were deterministic, I am going to have multiple equations because I have conditions in my programs that lead me to these junctions, and this gives me to more than one equation usually. So all these facts, what does it mean? It means that cost relations often do not have an exact solution. It's not that this is why I cannot use computer algebra systems, because one solution doesn't exist. I can only speak about best case and worst case. But if I aim to find an exact solution for very few programs, I will succeed. And of course, because they are very far from what computer algebra systems can solve. So this was a motivation why we started the development of PAS, which is the name comes from practical upper bound solver. Even if now we can do lower bounds as well, but we keep the name upper bound solver. And the main difference when compared to computer algebra systems is that we handle cost relations as if they were programs. So we tackle the problem from a programming language perspective rather than from a mathematical perspective. For us, this is a constraint logic program, and we try to bound the cost, having in mind this fact. So let me explain you the intuition. So imagine we want to compute, we want to solve this cost relation C. So what does these equations do? I mean, you can see them as a program in which I go and perform steps. And at each step, I have some cost accumulated, P that I accumulate. So what is the problem now? If I look at the problem in this way, what do I want to do? What I need to know is what is the length of this chain. I mean, I want to know how many P's I can have in total at most. The length of any evaluation using these equations or this program. So this is my problem. And if I know this, if I know the length, P multiplied by the length is the solution. No? I mean, if at each step I accumulate P, and I know the maximal length of this derivation, an upper bound is P multiplied by the length of this derivation. So now our problem was reduced to finding the length of the maximal length of derivations in this kind of programs, which are rather simple. I mean, well, simple and complex. They are simple because they work on integer variables, but are more complex because they have constraints here and they are non-deterministic. So we came up with a solution. I mean, all the information that I need to know what is the length, the maximal length of this derivation is in these constraints here. Here I know how variables change along the execution. So I have these constraints here that can tell me what I need. And the solution we came up with is called ranking functions, and they were used in the context of termination analysis since a long time. And so basically in termination analysis, what they do is that to prove that a loop terminates, they try to find a ranking function. If a ranking function exists, it's guaranteed that the loop terminates. So a ranking function is a function on the variables of the loop or the piece of code that I'm trying to prove termination. So it's a function on these variables, in this case, on these two variables, which has to satisfy two conditions. It has to be always positive. The evaluation of this function must be always greater or equal than 0. And it must be strictly decreasing. At each iteration of the relation or of the loop, it has to be greater or equal than 1. So for example, what is a ranking function for this loop? A minus j is a ranking function. So if you observe, when I am executing this relation, it's guaranteed that A is always greater than j, so this is always positive. And besides, at each iteration, the j is increasing, and thus this is strictly decreasing. So the good news is that we found algorithms that compute ranking functions and are complete for linear ranking functions. So most of the programs, most of the loops have linear ranking functions, and therefore we can find this length of the chains. So there are some examples which require polynomial ranking functions. I don't know if Ricardo has talked about this before, which are more elaborated, and there are some algorithms which are not complete, but at least in some cases they can find polynomial ranking functions and are complementary to the techniques we use. So this map here that I introduced means the positive value of the expression. It's for correctness. I am not going to go into the details. So, okay, we have succeeded to find an upper bound of the length of the derivation. And so now it's easy to find the worst case. The cost that I accumulate in each iteration multiplied by the maximum length is an upper bound, a sound upper bound for the relation. This you will say, okay, this was easy because it was a linear case. And what happens if I have an exponential function, exponential method? It works exactly the same way. So imagine I have an exponential function with two recursive calls. In the cost relations, what I get is that I get two recursive calls here in the relation. And thus, what the ranking function is giving me, in this case, evaluation is not a branch like this. It's a tree with many branches. So the ranking function, what it gives me is the depth of the tree. So 2 to the ranking function, if I have two calls, 2 to the ranking function is giving me how many nodes I can have at most in any evaluation for this relation. I don't know if you get this. But it's exactly the same idea. So we look at the shape of the relations, and if we find cases in which I have two calls, then I have to put 2 to the ranking function to provide a correct worst case upper bound. So this is the main idea. And this relation is an easy one because the cost that I accumulate is constant. It's always the same in all iterations. But this, of course, doesn't happen always. So now we try to finish the solving of our cost relation system for sort. And remember, this is the equation that we have produced for the outer loop. There is the outer loop that calls the one that we have solved. So the solving starts solving the relations that do not depend on any other relation. That was C before. C didn't have any goal to another relation, so we could solve it. We start to solve it, and then this is what we have done before, and then we replace the result in the equations that call C. So now we get an equation like this one. Okay? So we have this is the cost of the inner y. Was the linear cost that we have substituted in the relation for the for loop. So what happens here? Here there is an interesting new first problem that we have to solve. That is that the evaluation now, if we want to bound the cost of this relation, it doesn't accumulate a constant cost that we have done before. Before it was P all the time, it was a constant. Now, at each iteration, what I accumulate is different, it's a different value, so because I have variables here. That was the cost of the while loop. And I have here that A, the length, is not modified by the J. At each iteration is I plus 1 and I is decreased. So every iteration increases me the cost. I accumulate a bigger cost at each iteration. And this is, if you think about the problem, is because the while loop can perform a different number of iterations at each iteration of the outer loop. So the cost is larger and larger. First I was just looking at the end of the array. The second iteration I considered 2 elements, 3 elements. So that's what we would expect if we have a careful look at the program. So this, okay, the approach we have seen, multiply the cost by the length of the derivation doesn't work because this cost is, I don't know how many iterations, at each iteration is different what I accumulate. So, we know how to, the first problem, finding the ranking function, the first solution we found, is still needed and useful. The length of this derivation, I have techniques, complete techniques that find the length of the derivation, and it gives me that is I plus 1 iterations when I is this variable. Okay, this is what we have done before. But now, what do we do to find the cost? Our approach is trying to find what is this yellow box, what is the maximum value that the cost that I accumulate can take. So we see that it is increasing at each iteration, but we are already happy if we can find what is this big box, because then this big box multiplied by the length of this derivation is a correct upper bound. So this is our approach. This is the way we solve the problem. And we need, of course, techniques to find this, what is the maximum, what is this big box. And sometimes it's bigger than the actual. Usually it's actually bigger than the actual one. But the good thing is that it's a general approach and it can be applied in many cases, finding what is the worst case cost. And I will just give you, I will mention the techniques we use. I don't expect that you understand that. But it's a maximization problem. So what we try to find is the expression that we are accumulating, and we try to find what is the maximum value that this expression can take. And this can be solved by looking at the constraints we have here, finding, we want to maximize this expression because it's the one that we accumulate at each iteration. And we have to infer invariants that tell us the relation between the initial values for the equations and the constraints that we have here. And then we use integer programming to maximize the components that we have in the expression that we accumulate. So there are techniques to do this, which are rather quite efficient. they are able to maximize cost expressions in many cases, and then we are able to find this big yellow box, which give us the maximal cost of the expression can take. And in this case, for example, for this example, we get that the maximum value that this expression can take is when j is as small as possible. It's 1 actually, when we start to decrease the I until it gets to 0 and j is 1. And thus, this is the maximal value that that expression can take, which is actually the real one. So, okay, so this is a problem of solving, and then we just replace. We had a call to be, and we replace by the formula we have got, and we replace with the constraints, and we get the worst case upper bound for sort, which was the one we said in the beginning we were expecting and that we were trying to get. This is a linear visits in the for loop that accumulates Q, and quadratic visits to the inner loop that accumulates P. So, the question. And so then the theorem that one would expect, I mean, what do we get from here? We have a method P, and we select some cost model. We are counting instructions. In the same way we put down memory consumption, we put down cost method. We obtain an upper bound, which is a function of the input arguments of the method. And then what we have is that for any possible instantiation of these input values, if it is a correct instantiation that has a trace, then it is ensured that the upper bound that we get is always greater or equal than the cost of the corresponding trace. So this is, let's say, the final theorem after having all the pieces. So I try to give an intuition of how the technique works. Of course, there are many underlying analyses and size component to the solving, etc. This is more or less how it works. What time do we have to use? 45 minutes. So, well, there is a subject which could be very extensive. I just will mention it a bit, which is the field-sensitive analysis. So this is one of the hot topics in the analysis of object-oriented languages. It's reasoning about the data which is stored in the heap or in the global memory. And this is more difficult than reasoning about local data. So why? For example, if we have, imagine we have a loop as simple as this one. We have, if n is a local variable, if I and n are local variables, and we just increase the counter, we have a call to some method. So it's very easy to, existing techniques, almost any analyzer is able to infer that n minus I is a ranking function for the loop. So this is not a problem. But if instead of having a local variable n, I use a field here, I use the data which is stored in the heap, then what can happen? It can happen that the objects f and o are aliases. They are pointing to the same object. And then it can well happen that method n is increasing my field. It's increasing n. So if this happens, this loop doesn't have an upper bound. Actually, it doesn't terminate. So finding that f dot n minus I is a ranking function can be done, but it requires field-sensitive analysis. And the field-sensitive analysis tries to reason about the values of data which is stored in the heap. These fields can be numeric or can be references. The problem is the same. And there are too many approaches, too many streams. One is being field-sensitive and say, okay, I am going to try to approximate all the contents of the global memory as precise as I can. And this is the most precise option, of course, but it's often inefficient in practice. And so, in practice, many algorithms or many analyzers are field insensitive. Costa was field insensitive in the beginning. And we say, okay, we have to ignore the global memory because otherwise the analysis becomes too expensive. So The problem is that numeric fields, fields are used all the time in object-oriented programs, so ignoring them can be too imprecise, too unacceptable in practice. And the challenge, in our view, is to develop techniques that achieve a good balance between the accuracy of the analysis and the computational cost. And what we try to do is to do field-sensitive analysis by using a field-sensitive analysis. What does it mean? It means that we try to find out when fields are well-behaved. Well-behaved means that they are behaved as if they were local variables. We don't have too much aliasing, we don't have too many impure things. And in such cases, in these cases, we can transform them to local variables and reason on them using a field-insensitive analyzer. So this is the main idea. I don't have much time to do this, to go into detail this now. But essentially, I will just show you here on this example. We have a field access here, s.x.c, that I need to track its value to compute the cost. And what we do is a pre-analysis to prove that this field is well behaved and can be transformed into a local variable, a cost local variable, which is called G here. And we replace all the occurrences of the field by the new cost variable for the sake of the analysis. So the pre-analysis that we do to prove that fields are well behaved is not very expensive. It has some, it's a constancy analysis of references. And if we prove that fields are well behaved, then the rest can be done in a field-sensitive way, and we still get information from the fields. Okay, so we conclude this part saying that we are studying both the problems of cost and termination. They are very much related. So the knowledge we had in termination was very useful for cost. In particular, finding these ranking functions was essential to have an automatic way of inferring upper bounds. Also, termination is clear. That implies that if I prove that the program terminates, then the resource consumption must be bounded, but it doesn't give you what is this bound. So the problem of cost is extremely more difficult. And once we prove that the cost is bounded, or a cost model that takes into account all the instructions in the program, then we have proven termination as a side effect of the analysis. And so we developed Costa, and we will see now 2 minutes of a short demo of Costa. It was the first cost and termination analyzer for the whole sequential Java bytecode. It can handle also Java libraries. It checks termination and computes upper bounds for a relatively large class of programs. It allows also writing assertions to try to check if the resource consumption is the one that you expect. And then we have the other component, PAS, the other system, which is part of Costa, but it can be used independently also for other languages which are not necessarily Java. If you give them cost relations produced from any language, it tries to infer the formulas we have seen. And both systems are written in Prolog, and they use the Parma polyhedral library to handle the constraints. And in the case of paths, we have connected also to maxima in some cases to improve the precision. And okay, so this work, just to finish, this work is being developed in the context of several projects. We are working on this European project HAT, which still has 1.5 years to complete these results. It's UPM is a partner and a competence, so we are collaborating by means of some intermediate contract. We are also working on a Spanish national project. This one we have it in Polytechnica. And of course, PROMETIDOS, which is the sponsor of this course. And well, I just explained the basic techniques. They're very much underlying techniques, and we are currently working on more advanced topics. For example, we have been working on the modularity of the analysis. If we can analyze the different methods and then compose the results. On trying to have the analysis incremental, that I can modify one method and then see what of the information that I have picked up is still valid and what has to be completely reanalyzed. As I mentioned, so there is an active research line on trying to infer information on data which is stored in the global memory or the heap. This is quite a difficult problem. And we have done also some works on transforming to asymptotic form the upper bounds we produce. So this is global and without much loss of information can be done. Taking resource specifications, this requires comparing cost functions, and because they grow quite a lot, they can become rather complex, and so the problem is not trivial also. In present and future, we are going towards concurrency, so we are doing our first attempts in introducing concurrency in static analysis. First, we started with this language, Extend, which is quite interesting. It has a Java-like syntax, but the concurrency model is completely different, and it's actually much more simpler than the threads and the logs that are used in Java. And we are also considering, because in the HATS project, in the European projects, they are developing a language which is called LBS, which is, it has a functional part and an imperative part. And it's quite nice because all the sequential parts of the program are then the functional part, and you only have to deal with concurrency in the imperative part. So this separation somehow helps the analysis a lot. And okay, and these are things that Nikki will talk about. So just for some referencing, if you want to know more about what I have explained, here are the most relevant publications we have on the topic. So the first work is from ASOP 2007, where we propose the generation of populations from parents. So there is a journal version recently published. And the second main step that I have explained, which was obtaining the closed form upper bounds from the cost relation, was published in SAS in 2008, and there is also a journal version. So these are the two main references, and then we have some other works which can be of interest also. For example, all these ISMM papers, which try to estimate memory consumption in the presence of garbage collection with different strategies. For the treatment of heaps that I commented, we have these papers, the FM 2009 Premier fields, and we have a SAS version for reference fields. And so, well, this I mentioned symptotic and trading. And as you can see, I mean, the latest works are on concurrency, like with the publications for the Extend language. In this year in FM also we propose a way to combine static and dynamic techniques for improving the analysis of concurrent programs, and this final publication in the class. Okay, so is there any questions? Silent audience. Okay, so we can see a short demo of Costa. It is not this one. So Costa can be used from different kinds of interfaces, and the one I'm going to show is using Eclipse, that you might know is the most common environment for running Java, Eclipse. And so we have a plugin that is fully integrated. You see this palm tree here in the sun, in the Costa system, and you can click on it to analyze methods. So you can select some methods, or for example now I will select all methods that we have in this class. There are many preferences here in this menu that I don't have time to go into them. You can select instructions, memory, termination, but we just leave the defaults and start the analysis. So it has started here. and it is analyzing one method after the other. And when it finishes, I have here, in these warnings, I have, maybe it's, no, I will read. So it gives us here the complexity that it has inferred. And it gives, for example, this is a case which is a trivial function, which just has an if-then-else, and then it says that the upper bound that it infers is 4 instructions. It's a constant number of instructions, just 4. And it also tells me that terminates, yes, it always terminates. Okay, this is a trivial example. So in this one, we have a simple loop, divide by 2, which has a logarithmic complexity because it's dividing, the counter is divided by 2 at each iteration. So we come here and it gives me an expression which is logarithm of NAT of something. So it's log n. It's, because it's precise, it gives you what there is also some syntactic things. But it gives me that we have logarithmic complexity. Here there is an example for linear complexity. So I also go to the marker and I can see here that it's a function of A, which is the argument of this one. It traverses an array. I think this one, or this is an array, so it has a linear complexity. Just to give you an idea that there is a system which can do this kind of things. Okay, so thank you. There are no questions now. Vicky will explain it.
I have two very general questions. One is that you have chosen to analyze Java by code. I know from your history that you were in this project with the white code and so on. But my question is, what do you lose by choosing Java by code? If you analyze Java by code, you have many advantages because you can receive code from anywhere, and this is very nice. But do you lose anything for not analyzing source Java?
There is a precision loss. There is one paper that I think is from 2 years ago that says the loss of precision when analyzing by code. But I think it has to do something with the size of integers. Because sometimes the information is split on the stack, and there is a small precision loss. But I would say we don't lose anything in 99.9% of the programs. We have to do a lot of preprocessing. This is true. That the analysis has to do a lot of preprocessing, but the precision loss is minimal. It's minimal. Everything can be recovered. Almost.
The structure of the program.
The structure of the program can be recovered. But there is some precision loss for some. I don't know if there are real numbers of integer numbers of very large sizes. If you start to use them and you analyze the bytecode, there can be a precision loss, but we have never experienced that.
And the second one is about this limitation of the system. You have your calculation as linear guards, linear expression. You have to optimize this with linear programming techniques. My question is, in the benchmark you have done, how often is this situation? Which is a percentage of cases in which you succeed, the ranking function is linear.
But you know that the complexity is not linear.
Yes.
The intermediate.
It's the intermediate step for computing the length of the tree or the grass or so on.
Exactly.
Not be linear in order to succeed. Then
Exactly.
How often does it happen?
It happens. We have never found an example which requires something which is not linear, I would say. We have analyzed the Java libraries. So finding examples that require non-linear ranking functions is usually because you write a nested loop using one loop. If you use this trick that you have one, you want to write a nested loop, but you write it in one loop, and you start to increase the counter in this tricky way, This requires a nonlinear Maggian function. But apart from this, we have never found, we have many limitations in the analysis because sometimes the abstraction of arrays gives us precision loss, the abstraction of lists gives us precision loss, but not because of the linearity, because of handling data structures. But I think that it's complementary for some examples that are very specific. They might be required, but we haven't found practical cases when analyzing the Java libraries. We tried hard to find them because at some point we were motivated also to do this research, but we didn't find real examples. Maybe you have found other cases, I don't know. I asked Marco also if he has found examples.
I have the same experience. For some reason, the depth of the tree is normally linear. I don't know why. You happen also to catch I don't know why is that. And the guts, because the guts, the equation has to be linear also.
And there is a precision loss, for example, if you use multiplications in the system, but only when the termination depends on these multiplications, which is also not the case in most of the times. Usually loops are increased by counters that they increase linearly. So, the fact that you have multiplications doesn't make you lose precision in analysis because they are not affecting the cost. So